Welcome back, everyone. We are here in a new destination today. And so I'm going to start off by, for those of you who watched our last video, I posed the quiz of where it is that I was. So I'm going to answer that before we go into today's topic. And I'm also going to get you to guess where I am today. So I will try to show you the very beautiful scenery. It's super pretty. And then again, in the next video, I will tell you where I am at this point in time so you get a chance to guess. So as we're going through this video, well, I'll get you to guess about that in a second. In the meantime, where was I in the last video? In the last video, I was in Campione d'Italia, which is a very special Italian enclave in the, inside Switzerland, right across from Lake Lugano. Well, it's on Lake Lugano, right across from Lugano, the city. And so, yeah, I did a video about it a little while ago. It's a super cool place in the sense that you can live in Switzerland, well, in Italy, benefiting from the Italian 100,000 flat tax regime, while at the same time being in basically Switzerland and benefiting from kind of Swiss quality of life, etc. So very nice. Now, as for today, where am I? Let's see if I can give you guys some clues to see some identifiable landmarks. Let's see here. Can you see through there? Probably not. Let me go over here and see if I can get you a better view over here so that you can guess this place, because this is also a super cool, very picturesque, beautiful part of the world. And as I said, I will do a video about this and answer where this is as well. So let's see. There's like a very particular thing I'm trying to make it so that you can see here, and I don't know how we're doing on that. Okay, so the hint is look to the edge of the trees. It's kind of hard to see there, but yeah, try picking out if you can see something there, and you can see kind of the surrounding areas. Okay, great. So that's take a guess, put it in the comments below, and we'll see how you do on that one. Now, with that in mind, by the way, this is like an amazing, like really wonderful place. Maybe one of the top places in the world to live, but I'll talk about that in another video. Talk about residencies and things like that. So today I wanted to discuss for you the subject of trusts versus foundations. I haven't really talked about foundations much on this channel, but I think it is an important topic for various different things. And so I'll talk about kind of the uses, the differences, and go from there. It's kind of an in-depth topic, and there's lots of nuance to each of them, as I've mentioned about trusts in some other videos. So, you know, we'll leave some of those nuances for a future episode. But for now, this is a good start. So, before we get started, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell, put it in the comments below, or you can hit the notification bell. And if you'd like help with relocating abroad, getting residencies, citizenships, optimizing your global tax, etc., please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. Link in the description below. I'm super busy these days, so I don't have a lot of time to do calls with people. But that being said, I will do what I can to help you. Otherwise, send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net and offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so trusts versus foundations, really quickly. So a trust is a common law instrument. It's actually not a legal incorporated entity. So I get a lot of people who have the mistaken idea. They'll say, oh, the trust owns it. Actually, no, a trust doesn't own something. The trustee will hold it in trust for the beneficiaries. So this is right off the bat a fairly major difference. A trust is a relationship that is born, and yes, there's statute protecting it as opposed to, you know, just an arbitrary relationship. But that being said, it is still just a relationship, and that actually has a lot of benefits to it. But we can kind of go accordingly. So a trust technically doesn't really get sued. You go after the trustee, you go after the trust assets, or you go after the beneficiaries to go after the trust assets, or you go after the settlor, etc. By contrast, a foundation is a civil law instrument. It's more recently implemented. For example, I think it was in 2009 that Jersey, which is a common law British Crown dependency jurisdiction, implemented foundation rules. So they brought some foundations in. Now, foundations are a little bit confusing because what you'll hear is something like, oh, you know, we're looking at we have the Gates Foundation. Well, the Gates Foundation actually isn't a foundation. So that's a little bit confusing. So we use the term in certain parts of the world, foundation, but actually the legal form is usually a corporation of some sort or a trust of some sort. Okay, so that's kind of one thing worth observing, is that there is some difference between what we call a foundation and what is a legal foundation. Legal foundations are in places like Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Panama, what are some other, Seychelles, etc. Okay, so there's a variety of different places that have them, but yeah, technically it's a separate legal entity, more like a corporation. So a foundation is kind of a hybrid between a trust and a corporation. They actually are also really old. They date back, I think it's the 12th century is the start of trusts. Maybe it's 15th century-ish that we have the start of foundations. So, you know, quite a long time ago. And the idea of a foundation is essentially to have an entity that is more based on a purpose than based on a profit for shareholders. Okay, so usually a foundation is set up to achieve some sort of a purpose. There's a difference, which is that the foundation council, because there's no beneficiaries necessarily in a foundation, like a trust basically needs to have beneficiaries, unless it's a purpose trust, and that's a little bit different. But most of the time, a trust requires beneficiaries. In theory, you don't necessarily for a foundation. Usually the beneficiaries have certain rights. In the foundation, they don't necessarily, and it's kind of explicitly put there. When you do a foundation, the foundation does not need to have any assets put into it by the founder. Whereas a trust, basically, in order to set up a trust, you create a trust by putting assets into it. So you have the trust fund, the corpus of the trust that gets established, and it might be added to over time, but you know, that trust relationship is created when the settlor takes assets and entrusts them to a trustee to manage on behalf of the beneficiaries over time. So that's a little bit important to recognize. As compared with a corporation, essentially a foundation is not supposed to have owners. Now, from the purposes of banks are going to KYC everybody. That's just kind of the nature of how they go. So they're going to treat essentially everybody as a UBO, and so in that sense, it's a little off. But technically speaking, you know, the foundation council, the governing council, is not entitled to those assets. You know, there's usually some sort of a purpose, or it could be, you know, for somebody, right? It could be, the purpose could be to take care of somebody or some inheritance or whatever. Yeah, so the bottom line is a foundation can be sued. A foundation is its own legal entity. It is, however, supposed to be sort of a unowned legal entity, whereas a trust is a relationship between parties, which is governed by a trust deed and things like this. The relationship with beneficiaries is somewhat different. They're both potentially useful asset protection vehicles, potentially estate planning vehicles. One of the reasons why we would use a foundation often is because of the fact that a foundation will not have representation in the laws of certain countries, and so you get kind of this hybrid that can be used. In a lot of places, like in the US or Canada, etc., there's very specific laws related to trusts. Well, then we get into the question of how do you treat a foundation? And a foundation may be treated differently from one jurisdiction to another, and usually they're going to have to try and put it into some box of, like, is it a corporation, is it a trust, if they don't have foundation laws. So that you can play with it in some ways that are fairly useful, say with, for example, some CFC rules, etc. So yeah, I think the most important things to note are, number one, a separate legal entity versus not a separate legal entity. Requires putting assets in versus doesn't require putting assets in. Requires more or less beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries have certain key rights versus not being beneficiary focused. Okay, so that's the next one. And then for the purposes of tax and banking and all this kind of stuff, they're loosely going to be treated very, very similarly, but it depends from country to country how it happens. You often have tax transparent foundations in places, but you have tax transparent trusts as well. So anyway, that's just like a very quick overview. You can put almost limitless detail into trust deeds. For example, if you look at, there's something called step trusts in, in Cayman. I feel like I got that acronym wrong, but anyway, whatever it is. And it's basically anything you can put in an agreement, you can put there. So I will leave it at that, and if you have questions, we can comment on them. Now, the thing that I think is especially useful is we're often using foundations in crypto these days, and the reason we're using foundations in crypto is because we want to make it so that there is no income earned. Essentially, the token sale becomes something where the funds go in, and it's basically for the purpose of forming the DAO. And we want to keep that separate because we don't want to have earned income in the form of a token sale. It's kind of a distribution event. And so that's one key thing. For example, because of the fact that tokens are fundamentally not wanting in most cases to be categorized as securities, even though probably a lot of them are, if you want to argue that a token is not a security, then it should be the sale of property if you're selling it. And if you're creating the sale of property, then there's taxes on the sale of that property. And so we have to be quite careful about how that gets managed when we're setting things up. So anyway, that's one example of where foundations have become quite popular lately, and we would use them fairly frequently. So again, lots of details there. Let me know if you have questions, put them in the comments below, and I will see you on the next video.